Welcome, everyone, to the first session in this Department of Justice, Bureau of Justice Authority Stop School Violence Prevention Program webinar series. My name is Julie Assel, and I'm the President and CEO of Assel Grant Services. Throughout my career, I've had the opportunity to work with a variety of organizations, including school districts of all sizes, universities, and nonprofit organizations. I started my career as a grant professional with the Kansas City, Missouri School District, and have also been a reviewer of grants for the state of Missouri. I have the Grant Professional Certified Credential and the Certified Grant Management Specialist Credential. I've personally secured over $145 million in grant funding, with my team securing over $480 million to date. Today, I will introduce you to 3 federal portals and present information on the registrations required to submit a Department of Justice BJA Stop School Violence Grant. In this session, we are going to cover the SAM login.gov requirements, the grants.gov registrations, and the DOJ Just Grants registration system. Now let's start with the System for Award Management, or SAM.gov. Now, a short explanation of why we're starting with SAM.gov. Beginning in 1993, the federal government started to create a centralized electronic registration process for those who wanted to do business with the government, and the Central Contractor Registry, or CCR, was born. Realizing many efficiencies, the government continued to consolidate its electronic databases. And in 2012, SAM, with its legacy user records from the CCR, combined with other websites and databases to reduce the burden on those seeking to do business with the federal government. It eliminated redundancies and streamlined a wide variety of processes. It provided a single help desk to resolve issues with any of those databases. Now, if you have an organization who applied for grants, maybe all the way back to 1993, but not since 2012, your original organization registration for doing business with the federal government was actually with the CCR. Then in 2012, all of the CCR information was migrated over to SAM. That said, I will tell you that for many people and organizations, it was not a clean migration. And if this applies to your organization, please make sure that you're prepared to spend some extra time on this step, double checking your information, and maybe even making corrections. For SAM in general, we're going to walk you through the long registration process. This process can trip up many seeking grant funding, so plan to begin it as soon as you can. Now, on the SAM.gov website, there is a helpful FAQ section in the lower right-hand corner of the home screen. This section will take you to articles and videos, even walkthroughs for many of the things you will need to do in SAM. If your entity is registering with SAM for the first time, you will click the green Get Started button, and we'll discuss that process in just a few minutes. Now, signing up or creating a user account is different from registering your entity. Signing up is for a person to access the portal. Registering is for your organization to do business with the federal government. You must sign up and sign into your account to use many of the features of SAM.gov, such as searching or updating an entity's registration. You must register your entity to be able to apply for grants from the federal government. Now, the first step is creating a user account in SAM. When you go to www.sam.gov and you click the Sign In button in the upper right-hand portion of the screen, SAM.gov will take you to this screen with login.gov. This is the new secure site to create federal logins. It has higher security with a 2-step authentication system. Here, you will use the primary email address to be associated with all of these accounts. Then, with the 2-step authentication, you will choose a secondary authentication process. One option will be a cell phone that will either call or text you with a code to enter. A second option is actually a series of backup codes. And a third option is an authenticator app, which sends you a code. Be aware that each time you log in, a time-sensitive code will be sent to authenticate you. Now, when you have logged in at login.gov, you will select Continue to return to SAM. Here, you're going to select Create an Individual Account and enter the required information. Then make sure you respond to the confirmation email to complete your individual registration. As part of creating this individual registration, you will need to go through the roles process. The Add a New Role section will be in the lower right-hand portion of the workspace screen. Now, the first user to create an organization's registration will automatically be assigned the role of Entity Administrator. This person can assign additional users their roles, manage other users, and manage, update, and delete registrations. The Federal Help Desk recommends having at least 2 people assigned to this role. Now, other roles include the data entry role and the viewer role. The viewer role is less frequently used outside of very large organizations. The data entry role, frankly, is pretty handy if you're designating someone to only handle the annual registration renewal process. So let's do a real-life tricky question. What happens if the person whose email is associated with the account no longer works there? Well, one, if you have access to their account, you can reset the password, and then once you're in, you can change the email address. More likely, if you don't have access to the account, you must associate a different person via login.gov with the SAM account in order to make the change. Again, the help desk recommends having at least 2 people assigned to the entity administrator role, so hopefully both people won't leave at the same time, leaving you with no one to have access to the account. Otherwise, you will have to go through the help desk. And I will tell you that sometimes people have a tendency to, when one person leaves, say, oh, I've always got that second person. But you really need to act on when one person leaves, getting a second person in your system so you always have 2 people. Now, the next step is registering your organization entity. Here you will click the green Get Started button on the home screen. This takes you to a series of 4 steps to begin a new registration, which you can read through before you begin so that you understand the full process. Now, we have provided the entity registration checklist as part of this training, but just in case you can't find it, you can also download that entity registration checklist, which lists all of the information you will need during the registration process on this page. And then there's another Get Started button. I do want to point out a couple of other things on this slide. This last bullet here in the middle of the bottom of the image talks about what does it mean to get only a unique entity ID and not register. This is a mistake I've seen organizations make before. If you want to apply for grants, getting a UEI is just one step in the process. You must continue on and actually register your organization, which we will talk about in a second. Also on this screen, there is a link to find out if you are already registered. If you aren't sure, definitely search here, which could frankly save you a lot of work. Lastly, there is a link and instructions if you're trying to renew your registration instead of creating one. This is something you'll have to do annually, so it has its own place to renew. For example, you could be registered, but no one has completed your renewals, so we'll talk through that too. Then you're going to be asked these questions on the screen, and you will want to choose directly with U.S. federal government. For the first question, you will most likely choose Apply for Federal Assistance. As you can see, it says grants underneath in parentheses. For the next question, I recommend selecting Federal Government, since the reason you're registering is to apply for funding from the federal government. Now, on this next screen, it will ask you, what do you want to do? Most nonprofit organizations, which in this case school districts are, will choose the first option, register for financial assistance awards only. This requires less information in the registration process than all awards. Remember, you do not want the unique entity ID only on the far left-hand column. Now, just a note, there is another chance to download the registration guide if you've already not done so. On the next slide is the entity type. Here you are going to select the appropriate choice for if you are registering a government entity or not. In general, school districts are considered government entities. Here you're going to select your government entity type, which in this case is a U.S. local government, because school districts are considered a unit of local government. The next screen is confirmation of your entity type and the purpose of your registration. They give you another chance to download the entity registration checklist, marked here as Download Our Guide. The screen titled Prepare Your Data is another confirmation screen and another chance to, you got it, download the registration checklist. Are you catching their hint that this checklist is important to use? Here you'll see an outline of the 4 sections to complete registration. Get a unique entity ID, core data, points of contact, and representations and certifications. Now on the Enter Entity Information screen, for the legal business name and address, this is the address you use on your official tax forms, your 990s, etc. Please be very aware of street abbreviations, periods after things like LLC. I'll be honest, I've worked for previous organizations that has dozens of entries because the addresses were just a little different and it took forever to get it all cleaned up. SAM will search for a match to make sure that your entity is not already registered and will confirm your entity's address. Next, you will receive this validation screen. If there is any difficulty with any of the information you've provided, you may be asked for official documents to back up and complete this validation. We have provided a handout, EVS documentation requirements, to help you make sure you have what you need to validate your entity on hand. Once your entity address is validated, you will have the option to include your entity in public SAM searches. Now you can opt out of having non-sensitive information available publicly. If you select Include, it does mean that you're going to get spammed. Even if you unclick it, you're going to get some spam. You just won't get as much. If you unclick, your entity will not be searchable on SAM. When someone searches your entity's UEI or legal business name, SAM will return no results. This can be a problem, though, when trying to locate or renew your SAM registration. And a UEI will be assigned to the organization. You will need to verify you are authorized to conduct transactions on behalf of the entity being registered as well. Now, when you get to this point, the system goes back to the old color scheme, so the screen will look a little different like this. Here, you begin entering the core data or business information. This will include your organization's business start date, fiscal year-end close, company division name or number, and company website. The division name and number may not be appropriate, but your organization's website will be. Congressional district should autofill based upon your address. And then, ding, 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 you will create an MPIN. The MPIN is a password. It is needed for later updates to sam.gov and for grants.gov. You should save it with all your other login information. You must have this to make updates later on. Please keep it in a safe place. The next slide includes information about addresses and taxpayer identification numbers. It includes your physical address, your mailing address. For the selection for your TIN type, you're going to select EIN since you're registering an organization, and then you're going to enter your EIN. The next screen is more information about your taxpayer information. The tax year is for the most recent year your taxes were reported. Now, when you renew your SAM registration annually, you will need to update this field. Then you have the name and title of the individual executing consent. This is an officer with the authority to legally bind your organization, like your superintendent. Then the signature is actually you typing in that MPIN you created above. So again, make sure that you write it down. Then your date will autofill. The next slide is the CAGE code. Here you're going to indicate if you already have a CAGE code. That stands for Commercial and Government Entity Code. If you have one, you will need to provide it as the system can use it to help match if you're already registered. If not, the system will assign you one. This page covers information about your incorporation, your security level, which is not really applicable for school districts, and your entity type. For your institution type, you are going to select your appropriate educational institution. Then you will probably select no for a disadvantaged business enterprise, and then you may or may not select a Native American entity type, depending upon its appropriateness. This screen is about organization factors, entity structure, profit structure, and socioeconomic categories. For most school districts, your organization factor is not applicable. Your entity structure often is a corporate entity, tax exempt. Your profit structure is nonprofit organization, and you are not likely to select any socioeconomic categories. That said, please make sure you're talking with your finance person to ensure that all of the information on this screen is correctly filled out for your organization. Now, this slide shows where you put in banking and electronic funds transfer, or EFT, information. It is very important that you make sure that this information is correct, as if you are awarded a federal grant, most of it's going to be sent via EFT to the bank account on your SAM profile. So these fields to fill in include, does your organization accept credit cards as a payment? And then financial information like your bank account type, your routing and account number for the EFT, your ACH phone number, and then your remittance name and address for mailing in case the EFT fails. Now, this is interesting depending upon your organization. I have colleagues who have worked at giant health systems, and the remittance address was actually a bank address where they had a PO box to accept payments by check. So this section is definitely something to involve your accounting department or finance department in gathering the needed information. In addition, a lot of times the finance members of your staff are very hesitant to give routing and account information for EFT, so don't be surprised if they are actually the ones who want to fill out your SAM registration when it comes time to giving them all this information, because they're just not comfortable giving that out to just anybody. Now, this section is about executive compensation. If you answer yes to these next two questions, you must list the top 5 highest salaries of your organization. These two questions are 80% or more of your revenue from federal contracts or grants, and 25 million or more of your revenue from federal contracts or grants. If you are just registering for SAM for the first time, it is not likely that these two sentences are both true. This last question is about, do you share compensation information about senior executives through your public IRS filings? You may or may not as a nonprofit organization, but you definitely want to check with your leadership. Here you want to review this information on this page. For some, the answer will be no and then not applicable. If you select yes for the first option, You do not likely have active federal grants or contracts greater than 10 million because you're just registering now for the first time. But if you do, you must answer the last question because recipients that have federal contract, grant, or cooperative agreement awards with a cumulative total value greater than 10 million must disclose semi-annually any information about criminal, civil, and administrative proceedings. Now, the next slides are representations and certifications. You're almost done with SAM. Completing these statements here mean you don't have to do this with every single grant you apply for. I've been doing this long enough that I remember doing this physically, and then when we switched to electronically, making sure I did it on every single grant. So it's great to see this only in one place now. Here you're going to select yes, then save and continue. Here we have provided you with a listing of the representations and certifications. Again, you will review and then check the box. Our next section is points of contact. For the points of contact, you're going to need the name, email, phone, and sometimes the address for each individual. You can designate one person as multiple points of contact. But keep in mind, it is mandatory that you have at least the following: an accounts receivable point of contact, an electronic business point of contact, sometimes shortened as e-business POC. It's very helpful to have this person be the same as the SAM entity administrator who has set up the registration and will maintain it going forward, but it's technically not required. And then a government business POC. It's optional to have an alternate e-biz and government POC. We do highly recommend at least an alternative e-business POC. Once the e-business POC has been established, they will receive an email telling them to set up an account in grants.gov, which we're going to talk about in the next section. Now you will want to print off or print a PDF all this information to save for your records. It's very helpful when completing your renewal next year. Then guess what? Now you can click Submit. The registration confirmation page explains what happens next. Once you have read this, you can click Back to Workspace. The registration status will now read Submitted in your SAM workspace. Once the registration is approved by the federal government, the submitted status will then change to Active. Now there is a status tracker on the homepage for you to keep tabs on where your registration is during the process. Your SAM registration must be renewed annually. This must be done with someone with the entity administrator role in SAM. They're going to need their login.gov credentials, including access to that secondary two-factor authentication, whether that's the cell phone or that authentication process. They will also need access to their MPIN. MPIN. This was the password created when the SAM registration was created. Once you've logged in as an entity administrator, from the main screen, you will go to Workspace, then under Entity Information, locate your registration, which is usually either active or inactive. Then you will select Renew/Update your entities. Now, technically, there are multiple options for updating your registration. For example, you might also use this to update your points of contact if you have turnover at your organization. But no less than annually, you will select the second option. I would like to renew my entire entity registration. Now, after you select Next, the screen will ask, would you like to change the purpose of your entity's registration? Most likely, here you're going to select No. Then you will be taken through a series of screens, much like the original registration process. You can make any changes needed or simply confirm and continue. At times during this process, the system may send additional confirmation emails to you, require you to enter one-time codes. All of this is about security precautions. Be sure you have access to your email and be prepared for this. Just a note, On the taxpayer address screen, you must update the tax year. You will need your organization's MPIN to proceed from this page. The next biggest system that people worry about is registering with grants.gov. You must have a UEI and your SAM registration and must be listed as active in order to register with grants.gov. So if your registration still says submitted as described above, you will need to wait. The other tricky aspect is that while SAM says that registration can take up to 10 business days, it actually takes another 24 hours for the active registration to be visible to grants.gov. So it's really 11 business days. The reason you have to make sure you have a UEI and a SAM registration is that grants.gov will actually pull information about your organization from these systems. Specifically, you must make sure that your EIN and CAGE code have been verified. So the first step is to go to grants.gov. You're going to click Register in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. Then in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, you're going to see a red Get Registered Now button. Here you will enter your contact information, username, and password. Then you will receive a temporary code to confirm your email address. Once this has been confirmed, you can add organization applicant profile. Here you're going to add your organization's UEI, name, and your job title, then hit Save. You may have multiple organization applicant profiles for which you are associated if you are the one creating the workspaces for the grants they are applying for. Otherwise, just associate your account with each organization will trigger some kind of request email to send to the e-business point of contact for the organization so they can assign you a role in grants.gov. Although you will not use your grants.gov password to access grants.gov, and I know that sounds strange, you should save it. There are other systems which will occasionally require it. For example, the Assist system in ERA Commons if you apply to any grants from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration or the National Institute of Health, and you never know when that might happen. You will be prompted to link your grants.gov to your login.gov account that you created earlier. Use the same account you use for SAM. The person who is listed as the e-business point of contact in SAM will need a grants.gov account. They should receive an email from SAM with instructions. Then you create the grants.gov account for the e-business point of contact in the same way as any other individual, and you link it to the person's existing login.gov, which is also used for their SAM access. Grants.gov will recognize the email address and UEI as matching SAM, and then assign the e-business point of C role. If your organization's e-business point of contact is no longer with the organization, the SAM entity administrator can assign someone else the role in SAM. SAM will then send the new e-business point of contact an email, and they can create their grants.gov account. Now, if the e-business point of contact is unknown, you can check the SAM record. You can also add the organization to your individual account because the confirmation email gets sent to the e-business point of contact and it copies you on it. So you can get that email and see who that was. Now, for assigning roles, the e-business point of contact will log in, then click Applicants. Then they will manage applicants. They may need to enter their MPIN if there's been a password change since the last time applicants needed to be managed. When the e-business point of contact clicks on Manage Roles for the person they want to update, they can select from Standard Authorized Organizational Representative, or AOR, Expanded AOR, which allows them to also manage applicants, or Workspace Manager. Any of these three roles can create a workspace, which is what the collection of forms for an application submission. Most people only need Workspace Manager, which allows them to create a workspace for their organization. However, At least one person at the organization must be designated as the standard AOR or an expanded AOR. This person will have the authority to submit applications on behalf of the organization. The AOR is typically the superintendent for a school district. If it's anyone other than this individual, we recommend that a paper document be kept in which this executive official has signed, which authorizes the other individual to submit the application. This other person is not typically a grant writer because they have to have the legal authority to obligate the organization to fulfill terms of a federal agreement. So please examine your board policies to make this decision. Then once you've selected the correct roles for the user, click Save. So what is Workspace? Well, it's the application package to apply for most of the grants offered by the federal government. You can put your name of your grant in the search fields along the left, and then you will select the opportunity number. Third, you're going to click the red Apply button. Now, if this is grayed out, you do not have a role with your organization. If you didn't log in before conducting your search, it's actually going to require you to log in at this point. If you have multiple profiles or roles with multiple organizations, you need to select the correct organization in Profile. Here you're going to enter the application filing name, which includes the name of the organization and the grant, or at least some kind of abbreviations. If there are multiple grants to be applied for, make sure this name is distinctive, and then you will click Create Workspace. Now you might be thinking, that has to be it, right? It's the federal government. So unfortunately, no. Despite all the work to get all of these federal departments to use one system, they actually don't. There are several department-specific portals. Some are for submission of grant applications, and some are for grants management after the award. So now we're going to talk about the Department of Justice, who developed their own grants management portal, the Justice Grant System, or Just Grants. To get to this portal, applicants submit the standard Form 424, also called SF424, and their standard form Disclosure of Lobbying, or SFLLL, through grants.gov. Then applicants are given access to the Just Grants system. Now, there is only 1 week between the grants.gov deadline and the Just Grants deadline. So the sooner you get these forms submitted through grants.gov, the sooner you can have access to the full application. Too often, inexperienced applicants wait until they have their final budget numbers ready before they submit in grants.gov. But the Department of Justice has said that preliminary estimations or responses in grants.gov are allowed for submission. The only information which cannot be easily edited in grants.gov is the UEI and the TIN entity identifiers, which can actually only be changed directly in SAM.gov, and the 2 contacts listed on the SF424, which is the authorized organizational representative who becomes the authorized representative in Just Grants, and the project director who becomes the application submitter in Just Grants. Any changes related to these 2 contacts must be made by the organization's entity administrator, who is the e-business point of contact in grants.gov. These changes must then be made in the Diamond user management system. So let's slow down and talk about each of these user roles, how they're created and edited, and what they can do in the Just Grants system. Now, if you are registering for Just Grants for the first time, your electronic business point of contact, or e-business POC, from sam.gov will be your entity administrator in Just Grants. They will receive an email notification from the system after you submit the first part of the application from grants.gov. But the emails are not coming from Just Grants. They come from DOJ's Digital Identity and Access Management Directory, or Diamond. Having worked with many organizations, I will tell you that these email notifications often go to spam or junk mail because the acronym is not actually the word Diamond. If the e-business POC did not receive the Just Grants enrollment email, a new invitation can actually be requested by sending an email to justgrants.support@usdoj.gov. Now, similar to the e-business point of contact's role in grants.gov, the entity administrator is the only user that can assign roles to individual users in Diamond. The entity administrator invites individual users to Just Grants and then adds their roles. After each user logs into Just Grants successfully, the entity administrator will be able to assign users to specific applications. Again, new users must first log into Just Grants to become active before they can then be assigned to an application by the entity administrator. The entity administrator also manages entity level information. This data is basically managed in SAM.gov. Just Grants pulls its entity information directly from SAM.gov to ensure consistency and integrity. This means that if an organization's SAM.gov registration is not active or has expired, their award can be delayed or suspended until their registration is active in SAM.gov. The second person who receives an email notification from Diamond after the submission of the first part of the application from grants.gov is the person listed as the project director role. This person will be automatically assigned the role in Diamond of application submitter. Similar to the entity administrator, this person will need to look for the email in their spam or junk if it isn't in their inbox. Application submitters will need to follow the directions in the email, create an account, and be assigned to the application by the entity administrator. They will then complete the application on behalf of their organization, including the web-based budget form. If your organization would like more than one person to be able to work on an application, the entity administrator can now add a total of 3 application submitters to each application. The application submitter will locate their application in the My Work List section of their homepage if they are the owner. They can then open it and enter data into the application. If there is more than one application submitter, it will be in the Applications section. In addition, others cannot open an application if it's already open by another application submitter. They're going to receive a little bell notification in the upper right-hand corner when someone's editing the application, someone has been assigned or removed from the application, and when the application has been submitted. Email notifications are also sent when an application submitted has been assigned or removed from an application. Email notifications are also sent when an application submitter has been assigned or removed from an application. They are also sent 5 days prior to the deadline, another notification, or when the application has been submitted or an application has been recalled. Now, the third role is the authorized representative. The BJA STOP School Violence Prevention Program application must have 2 individuals with this role. The first person must be an executive level program official. The second person must be an executive level financial official. These individuals must be invited to create a Just Grants user account by the entity administrator. The authorized representative must, again, have the legal authority to enter into contracts, grants, and cooperative agreements with the federal government on behalf of the entity. Once they are added to Just Grants, they can be given the authorized representative role on the appropriate applications. Now, this registration process should be started as early as you can. Don't wait until the last 2 weeks before the grants.gov deadline. There are too many things, frankly, that can go wrong. After 20 years in this field, I've seen a lot of them. Also, remember, you don't need to pay anyone to create or update your SAM registration. This is a free process. And this registration process can take place while your organization is developing its program in response to this solicitation. Well, thank you so much for joining me today as we walked through the detailed steps for registering with SAM.gov, grants.gov, and the Just Grants systems. Your next training session will walk you through the BJA STOP School Violence Prevention Program solicitation. Have a great rest of your day.